Look around your room for a second. Almost everything you can see has a hidden connection to one substance. Your phone, your shoes, the paint on your walls, the road outside your house. Now imagine waking up tomorrow and none of it exists. Not because it was destroyed, because humans never discovered crude oil. For almost all of human history, that wasn't imagination. It was reality. So how did one strange black liquid bubbling out of the ground become the substance that reshaped civilization? You're walking beside a river 7,000 years ago. The ground suddenly sticks to your feet. You look down. A thick black liquid is slowly bubbling out of the earth. It smells strange. It won't wash off? Nobody has ever seen anything like it. You have no idea you've just discovered the same substance that will one day power airplanes, build cities, and change the fate of every civilization on Earth. The question is, what do you do next? Your village has spent days repairing fishing nets damaged during the last flood. You have no map, no compass, no idea that beneath your feet lies one of the greatest energy reserves on Earth. You're simply looking for reeds. Then something catches your attention. The ground ahead looks wet, but it hasn't rained. You walk closer. A thick black liquid is slowly bubbling out of the earth. It isn't water, it isn't mud. It smells sharp. You crouch down. Curiosity wins. You touch it. Instantly, your fingers stick together. You wipe them on the grass. Now the grass is black. You wash your hands in the river. Some of it refuses to come off. You've just met crude oil, although you have absolutely no idea that's what it is. And honestly, why would you? Your ancestors didn't know about geology. They didn't know about fossil fuels. They didn't know about ancient oceans or microscopic plankton. All they knew was that the Earth had produced something unlike anything they'd ever seen before. And here's what's fascinating. That scene almost certainly happened countless times. Not because humans were looking for oil, because oil was impossible to avoid. Today, geologists call these places natural oil seeps. Underground petroleum slowly migrates upward through porous rocks until it reaches cracks in the Earth's surface where it emerges naturally. Some seep only after heavy rainfall. Others bubble continuously for thousands of years. These seeps still exist today. You can find them in Iraq, Iran, Azerbaijan, California, even around the Dead Sea. They're living reminders that humanity's first encounter with petroleum required no technology whatsoever. Nature made the first introduction. Think about that. One of the most valuable resources our species would ever use wasn't discovered with machines. It was discovered with bare feet. But here's where the story becomes surprisingly human. Your ancestors weren't scientists. They were observers. Every day depended on noticing small details. Which berries made people sick, which animals returned every spring, which stones broke cleanly enough to make sharp tools. Curiosity wasn't entertainment. It was survival. So when something behaved differently, people experimented. Not because they wanted knowledge, because they needed solutions. Somebody almost certainly carried that sticky black substance back to camp. Somebody pressed it between two pieces of wood. Somebody smeared it across a cracked basket. Someone else spread it along the bottom of a leaking reed boat. And then something remarkable happened. The water stayed outside. Nobody understood chemistry. Nobody knew hydrocarbons existed. Nobody talked about viscosity or waterproofing. They simply saw the result. Sometimes that's all innovation needs. Evidence suggests exactly this happened in ancient Mesopotamia. Archaeologists excavating Ubaid period settlements dating to around 5,500 to 4,000 BCE repeatedly uncovered thick layers of natural bitumen coating reed boats. One of the most important discoveries came from the archaeological site known as H3 in present-day Kuwait. Archaeologist Robert Carter published the findings in the early 2000s, showing that people living more than 6,000 years ago deliberately collected and heated natural bitumen before spreading it across boat hulls. Imagine what that means. Someone didn't just find oil. Someone realized it could solve a problem. That's a completely different kind of discovery. History rarely changes because people find unusual things. History changes because someone asks, what happens if I try this? That's the question that built civilization. And it appears again and again throughout human history. A strange stone becomes a knife. A wild grass becomes wheat. A frightened wolf becomes a dog. A sticky black liquid becomes waterproofing. Civilization often begins with curiosity disguised as an accident. But here's something even more surprising. For thousands of years, oil had absolutely nothing to do with energy. That sounds almost impossible today. When you hear the word oil, your brain immediately thinks of fuel. Cars, airplanes, power plants. Your ancestors thought about something much simpler, keeping boats afloat, repairing walls, stopping water from leaking into homes. The first petroleum economy wasn't about transportation, it was about staying dry. And that's exactly what archaeologists continue finding. Bitumen wasn't only used on boats. Excavations across Mesopotamia have uncovered bricks bonded with natural asphalt, storage baskets sealed against moisture, and ceremonial objects repaired with petroleum-based adhesives.
As archaeologist Harriet Crawford explains in her work on the Sumerians, bitumen became one of the defining construction materials of southern Mesopotamia because stone was scarce while natural petroleum was abundant. The earth itself supplied building materials. Think about your own home. If your roof started leaking tonight, you'd probably visit a hardware store tomorrow. Your ancestors couldn't. Every repair depended entirely on what nature provided. Suddenly, a mysterious black substance bubbling from the ground wasn't merely interesting. It became indispensable. But here's the mystery no one could answer. Where did it come from? Imagine standing beside that bubbling spring every morning. One day there's a little, the next day there's more. No trees produce it, no animals leave it behind. It simply emerges from beneath the earth. Without modern science, what conclusion would you reach? Many ancient cultures believed unusual substances emerging from the ground were gifts from powerful gods or signs from the underworld. Considering the evidence they had, those explanations were understandable.
If you had been standing there, would you have touched the black liquid or stayed away? Tell me where you're watching from because I'd love to see how far these stories travel. The real answer wouldn't arrive until thousands of years later. In 1984, petroleum geologists Alain Tissot and Dietrich Velte published one of the most influential books ever written on petroleum geology, petroleum formation, and occurrence. Building on decades of geochemical research, they demonstrated what scientists now overwhelmingly agree upon. Crude oil did not come from dinosaurs. It formed primarily from microscopic marine organisms, plankton and algae, that lived in ancient seas hundreds of millions of years ago. Buried beneath layers of sediment, their organic remains were transformed by heat and pressure into kerogen and eventually into petroleum. It's one of the most astonishing timelines in natural history. The black liquid sticking to your ancestors' fingers began its journey before the first human being ever existed, before mammoths, before the Ice Age, long before our species walked across Africa. Your ancestors couldn't possibly know that, but they didn't need to. Knowledge often arrives in two stages. First, people discover that something works. Much later, they discover why. Ancient humans mastered the first step. Modern science finally explained the second. And that simple difference may be one of the defining characteristics of our species. We experiment first. We understand later. In fact, that's still how much of science works today. But the story of oil is only beginning. Because once people realized this strange black substance could waterproof boats and strengthen buildings, they started carrying it far beyond the places where it naturally emerged. The world's first petroleum trade had quietly begun, not because people wanted fuel, because they wanted better lives. Black trail across ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond, where crude oil became medicine, architecture, religion, and one of the earliest traded resources in human history. You're carrying a basket of black stones. At least, that's what you think they are. The strange material you found bubbling out of the ground has become useful. Your village now smears it across leaking boats before every fishing trip. Walls last longer through the rainy season. Water jars stay sealed. Nobody calls it petroleum. It's simply the black stuff that works. And then something unexpected happens. People begin traveling for it. Not because they're curious anymore, because they need it. This is one of the first moments in history when an ordinary natural material quietly begins connecting distant communities. Long before coins, long before banks, long before written contracts, a sticky black substance is already becoming part of trade. Think about what that means. Nobody would carry something heavy across hundreds of kilometers unless it solved a problem that couldn't easily be solved another way. That's exactly what archaeologists believe happened in ancient Mesopotamia. Bitumen wasn't found everywhere. Natural seeps formed only in certain geological regions. Villages lucky enough to live near them suddenly possessed something their neighbors desperately wanted: a waterproof boat, a stronger wall, a better storage jar. Sometimes civilization doesn't begin with gold. Sometimes it begins with fixing leaks. Evidence for this keeps appearing beneath the sand. Archaeologists have recovered thousands of pieces of ancient bitumen from settlements stretching across Mesopotamia and the Arabian Gulf. Chemical analysis has done something remarkable. It has traced where the bitumen originally came from. In the early 2000s, archaeologist Robert Carter and geochemists studying Ubaid period sites compared the chemical fingerprints of archaeological bitumen with natural oil seeps across the region. They found that some villages were importing bitumen from sources hundreds of kilometers away. If you're still here, type curiosity below. I'd love to know how many explorers are watching until the end. Imagine that. 6,000 years ago, someone loaded chunks of natural petroleum onto a boat and sailed them to another community. Not because anyone needed fuel, because someone needed a better canoe. That's one of history's favorite tricks. The greatest revolutions rarely begin looking revolutionary. But here's where the story becomes even stranger. The more people handled bitumen, the more uses they discovered. That's another uniquely human habit. We almost never stop after solving one problem. We immediately ask, what else can this do? Your ancestors noticed that when bitumen cooled, it became harder. When warmed by the sun or a fire, it softened again. Suddenly it wasn't just waterproof, it was moldable, repairable, reusable. Without knowing the word materials science, they were practicing it. Every generation learned something new. Someone discovered it could hold stone blades inside wooden handles. Another discovered it sealed baskets against insects. Someone else used it to repair cracked pottery. Innovation wasn't happening inside laboratories. It was happening around campfires. One small experiment at a time. Modern archaeology keeps confirming these discoveries. Excavations at sites like Eridu, and H3 have uncovered bitumen used as adhesive, waterproofing, mortar, and protective coating. Harriet Crawford, whose work on ancient Mesopotamia has shaped much of our understanding of early Sumerian life, describes bitumen as one of the defining construction materials of southern Iraq, where quality building stone was almost non-existent. Think about the irony. The region that lacked stone possessed one of nature's greatest natural adhesives. The landscape itself quietly solved its own problem, but humans didn't stop there, because eventually someone made another observation. The black material burned, not explosively, not like gasoline. Natural bitumen is far too thick for that. But under the right conditions, it could catch fire. Imagine seeing that for the first time. A mysterious substance already believed to emerge from deep beneath the earth, now producing flames. Without chemistry, without geology, without physics, it must have seemed almost supernatural. And perhaps that's why petroleum slowly entered another part of human life: religion. Throughout the ancient Near East, naturally burning gas vents and petroleum seeps became associated with sacred places. Some fires appeared to burn continuously because natural gas escaped from underground and ignited at the surface. Thousands of years later, many of those locations would still be regarded as holy. One of the most famous examples survives in modern Azerbaijan. At Yanar Dag, flames continue burning because natural gas seeps through the rock. Although today's fire is maintained by modern gas pressure and may not be continuously ancient, the region has been associated with natural eternal fires since antiquity. Greek historians even described mysterious burning landscapes farther east. Imagine standing before a hillside that never seems to stop burning. Wouldn't you believe something extraordinary lived beneath it? Sometimes mythology begins with careful observation. People simply lacked the scientific language to explain what they were seeing. The story becomes even more remarkable when we travel southwest, ancient Egypt. When most people think about Egypt, they imagine pyramids, pharaohs, golden masks. Very few think about oil, but they should, because petroleum quietly found another purpose there, not in transportation, in eternity. For generations, historians noticed dark substances covering some Egyptian mummies. During the 19th century, many assumed it was simply resin. Modern chemistry revealed something more interesting. Using techniques like gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, researchers led by Stephen Buckley and Richard Evershed analyzed embalming materials from ancient Egyptian mummies. Their studies, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science during the early 2000s, showed that embalmers used complex mixtures including plant resins, beeswax, animal fats, and in some later periods, naturally occurring bitumen. Think about that. The same material waterproofing boats in Mesopotamia was helping preserve human bodies in Egypt. One substance, two civilizations, completely different ideas. That's the beauty of human ingenuity. Nature provides the material, culture decides what it becomes. But here's something even more fascinating. The Egyptians didn't simply copy Mesopotamia. They experimented. Every civilization added something new. That's how knowledge grows, not in giant leaps, but through thousands of tiny improvements spread across generations. The black liquid bubbling from the earth was no longer just a curiosity. It had become part of architecture, trade, religion, medicine, and even humanity's oldest dream, defeating death itself. Yet the greatest surprise was still waiting, because while Mesopotamians collected oil where it naturally reached the surface, Another civilization asked an entirely different question. What if we could reach the source? That single question would lead to one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. Centuries before Europe drilled its first commercial oil well, ancient engineers in China were already boring deep into the earth, not looking for gasoline, but accidentally unlocking the future. We'll follow them in the next part. Before we do, I want to ask you something. Which surprises you more? That ancient people traded petroleum over long distances, or that they used it to help preserve the dead? You're standing beside a bamboo tower. It's taller than any building you've ever seen. Men are lowering a heavy iron drill into the ground using ropes woven from plant fibers. Every few seconds, the drill strikes the earth with a dull thud. Again, again, again. You've been digging for weeks. Not because you're searching for treasure, not because you're looking for oil. You're looking for salt. Because without salt, people die. Your muscles fail. Your nerves stop working properly. Food spoils. Entire communities struggle to survive. We've already talked about how valuable salt once was. But here's the astonishing part. While searching for salt, ancient Chinese engineers accidentally became the first people in history to drill deep enough to reach underground petroleum and natural gas. And they did it nearly 2,000 years before the modern oil industry was born. Think about that. When most people imagine ancient technology, they picture stone tools or bronze swords. Very few imagine drilling hundreds of meters into solid rock. Yet that's exactly what happened. By the time of the Han Dynasty, Chinese craftsmen had spent generations perfecting percussion drilling. Instead of digging wide holes, they repeatedly lifted and dropped heavy iron drill bits suspended from long bamboo cables. It was slow, painfully slow, sometimes advancing only a few centimeters each day, but every strike carried them deeper beneath the earth. Generation after generation, those techniques improved. According to Joseph Needham's monumental series, Science and Civilization in China, some Chinese wells eventually exceeded several hundred meters in depth, with later historical records describing wells approaching 1,000 meters. For centuries, many Western historians thought those accounts were exaggerated. Modern archaeology proved they weren't. Sometimes history turns out to be even more impressive than legend. But here's the beautiful irony. The workers weren't searching for oil, they barely cared about it. They wanted the salty underground water known as brine. Brine could be boiled until the water disappeared, leaving behind valuable salt. That was the real prize. Oil was simply something they encountered along the way. History is full of discoveries made by people searching for something else. Christopher Columbus wanted a sea route to Asia. Alexander Fleming wasn't trying to discover antibiotics. Ancient Chinese drillers weren't trying to build the petroleum industry. Sometimes curiosity rewards questions you never intended to ask. Then another surprise emerged. Natural gas began escaping from the wells. Imagine hearing it for the first time. A faint hissing sound rising from hundreds of meters below your feet. You can't see it, you can't touch it, yet it's there, invisible, powerful, potentially dangerous. Many people might have ignored it. The Chinese didn't. Instead, they did what humans have always done. They experimented. According to Joseph Needham's research and historical Chinese records, engineers eventually captured this natural gas using bamboo pipes and directed it toward evaporation furnaces. There, the gas burned beneath large metal pans filled with brine. The water slowly disappeared. The salt remained. Pause for a moment and appreciate what you've just imagined. Long before steam engines, long before coal-powered factories, long before the Industrial Revolution, people were already transporting natural gas through pipelines, made from bamboo. That's extraordinary. The future often arrives quietly. No one standing beside those bamboo pipelines believed they were inventing part of the modern energy industry. They were simply trying to make salt more efficiently. Once again, human history wasn't driven by grand visions. It was driven by ordinary people solving ordinary problems. And that's exactly why your ancestors matter. They remind us that civilization isn't built by dramatic moments alone. It's built by millions of practical decisions repeated across generations. Meanwhile, something else was happening across the world. Oil continued shaping civilizations in ways nobody fully understood. Greek physicians occasionally prescribed petroleum-derived substances for skin conditions and wounds. Roman builders continued using bitumen in construction. Travelers described mysterious burning springs, where flames seemed to emerge directly from the earth. Every culture noticed something different. Every culture asked different questions. The earth kept offering the same mysterious substance. Human imagination kept finding new uses. Then, everything changed. Not gradually, almost overnight in historical terms. The year was 1859. A former railroad conductor named Edwin Drake arrived in Titusville, Pennsylvania. People already knew oil seeped naturally from the ground. Native American communities had used it for generations. Settlers skimmed it from streams for medicinal purposes. The mystery wasn't whether oil existed. The mystery was whether people could reach large amounts of it underground. Most believed drilling specifically for oil was foolish. Drake disagreed. Borrowing techniques already used for drilling salt wells, he pushed deeper into the earth. On August 27, 1859, his well struck oil at a depth of about 69 feet. It wasn't the first oil humans had ever collected. Far from it. But historians widely recognize it as the first commercially successful oil well designed specifically for petroleum production. That's an important distinction. Discovery and industry are not the same thing. Humans had known oil for thousands of years. Edwin Drake transformed it into an industry, and from that moment onward, history accelerated. Kerosene replaced whale oil in lamps. Internal combustion engines appeared. Automobiles spread across continents. Airplanes crossed oceans. Cities expanded. Plastic transformed manufacturing. Synthetic fibers changed clothing. Modern medicine developed countless petroleum-based materials. The strange black liquid that once repaired leaking boats now helped shape nearly every part of modern civilization. It's difficult to think of another natural substance whose role changed so dramatically. For nearly 6,000 years, oil solved small problems. Then suddenly, it began solving civilization-scale problems. And yet, the most remarkable part of the story isn't technological. It's human. Think back to where we began. A person walking beside a river, a sticky black liquid bubbling from the ground. No science, no chemistry, no idea that microscopic marine organisms living hundreds of millions of years earlier had created it. Just curiosity. That's the thread connecting every chapter of this story. The Mesopotamian builder who waterproofed a boat. The Egyptian embalmer preparing a mummy, the Chinese engineer drilling for salt, Edwin Drake lowering his drill into Pennsylvania. They all shared one habit. They refused to ignore something unusual. Your entire modern world exists because generation after generation kept asking one simple question. What happens if I try this? Maybe that's the real story of crude oil. Not that humans discovered it, but that humans never stopped discovering new ways to use it. Every generation inherited the curiosity of the one before. And every generation left behind another piece of the puzzle. Look around your room one more time. The road outside, the paint on your walls, your glasses, your toothbrush, your computer, your phone. It's easy to believe these things belong only to the modern world, but in a strange way, they all began beside a quiet river thousands of years ago when someone reached down, touched a mysterious black liquid, and wondered why it wouldn't wash off. Perhaps that's what history really is. Not a collection of kings and battles, but an endless chain of ordinary moments where curious people noticed something everyone else walked past. Your ancestors weren't extraordinary because they knew the answers. They were extraordinary because they kept asking questions. And maybe that's the oldest inheritance they've passed down to you. If this journey changed the way you think about one of the most ordinary substances in modern life, I'd love to hear from you. Which discovery surprised you the most? The Mesopotamian boats? The Egyptian mummies? The bamboo gas pipelines? Or the realization that humans knew crude oil for thousands of years before anyone drilled for it? What surprised you the most? That ancient people traded petroleum, used it to preserve the dead, or drilled hundreds of meters into the earth long before modern industry? I'd genuinely love to hear your answer.